a town you never heard of. Hey everybody, welcome to the Common Folk Podcast with Ben, Morgan, and Andy.
Welcome back to Common Folk,
the podcast for the people, by the people.
That's right. That's right.
Howdy.
You got it.
We got more people here today.
Yes, we do.
Bringing them back.
Got a couple of cool conversations coming up. Before we get into that, wanted to encourage folks to get on the platforms and do the reviews, do the 5 stars, do all the things.
Pump it up.
We've got a new one that came in, and this is from the handle GTO Joe X3.
Oh.
Now, it just so happens that I actually know who this guy is.
I was just thinking, okay, wait, is that the person's fake name? Do we know who this is? You know.
It just so happens.
You researched it?
So as far as common folk go, so this guy, this is exactly what we're trying to do. We're trying to connect with common folk. So this guy, I don't know all of his background, but what I do know today is that he is the assistant chief of a small town fire department, volunteer fire department. Does a bunch of stuff in his community.
Sure.
Has kids, grandkids, does all the things, has all the life that all the common folk have. So they drive around, listen to the podcast, and he did a review, and it says, great podcast that talks about common topics from common folk perspective. Great Midwest viewpoints. And I always think it's kind of funny that we get like that Midwest tag.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, obviously we do.
Right.
That's what we are.
That's all I have to give.
I don't know anything. Well, we moved outside of the Midwest, but
I also think that it's funny that the Midwest mentality is that common sense kind of central, type mentality.
Right.
So what's the mentality of somebody else that doesn't live in the Midwest?
Well, I mean, I think people have all kinds of mentalities, but I think in general, it's kind of like, where companies have, what's the phone thing? Like they call around, like they're selling stuff.
Yeah. Telemarketers.
Yeah. Telemarketers.
Centers.
Yeah. And they always want to use like Midwest.
Yes. Yep.
Right? Because that's the baseline.
Right. Yeah, because we don't have an accent one way or the other.
Okay.
Yeah.
It sounds like we're from nowhere because it's kind of true.
Right. And that's what we are. So Joe is getting a podcast T-shirt. So be like Joe.
Be like Joe.
Get on the apps. The Apple app, you can do a review.
Yeah.
You can also do the stars, and on the Spotify deal, you can do the stars. I think that's about it. I don't know if any of the other ones have come out with it, but that helps us a lot. It helps us get some traction. So like I said, be like Joe, get a free T-shirt, do that, email us, and
Can we throw YouTube in there? Our podcast, we're putting it on
100%.
YouTube now.
Yes.
Yep.
And just leave a comment, give us a thumbs up or thumbs
Oh yeah, because
down.
you can do that on. Yeah, of course you can do that on YouTube. Yep.
Yeah, just say, Andy, shut up and give me a thumbs down, and we'll send you a T-shirt.
So get on there and do that. So thank you, Joe. And moving on this week, so we've got coming up here shortly, Veterans Day. What do you got going on over there?
Well, I got...
it looked like he was struggling.
Our friends over at Nebraska Brewing Company. No, I learned this a long time ago. If you press it like this with your thumb...
Oh, it loosens it?
Well, you release some of the pressure there, so then it doesn't explode and, you got foam going everywhere.
I just thought you looked like a lady that couldn't open it that got her nails done.
No, I was being very meticulous, and I was opening the beer the correct way.
That's nice.
Yeah,
good work.
Dean's got a good idea over here. He's saying
Shotgun
it.
Just stab the side. It opens right up. Yeah.
I mean, shoot, it's 5 o'clock somewhere.
Maybe after this podcast we could shotgun a few of these.
I mean, it's like we talked about earlier. You got some pumpkin, got some veggies.
Yep. That's how you celebrate.
Getting all your goods in one can.
Boy, they redid the pyramid, right? The food pyramid. I wonder where pumpkin beer falls on that now.
Oh, I'm not sure. I mean, I think
it's got its place, I'm sure.
Yeah, our potato chips on there or something too. So we're good.
If folks rewind, if you're new to the podcast or depending on what you've listened to, if you go back to February 16th of this year is when we dropped the last podcast with Dean and had some really interesting conversations. And at the time we were like, man, we got to have you back.
Yeah.
Like there's so much here that we can get into. And even after today, I'm not going to be satisfied. Like I know there's going to be.
Well, okay, so we got Dean Shissler back. Okay. And yeah, that last one, we just scratched the surface of like
A tiny bit.
So let's start here. Let's start today. We mentioned how Veterans Day is right around the corner, and I don't think there's anybody better in the tri-state area or maybe across the nation that could talk to us about this. Better than Dean.
You better not let us down with that introduction.
That was a pretty lofty intro to live up to.
That's a big one.
There's probably better people in a 10-mile circle from here. But, yeah, I mean, I've done some work into it. I mean, my career is obviously with the museums there in Nebraska City and mostly local history, but my personal research for my master's thesis was on Colonel Hayward, who's a local Nebraska City native son, I guess, born and raised, who was the commander of the Harlem Hellfighters in World War I. So World War I is sort of my topic of interest, I guess. Because I like choosing really complicated, hard to understand things, and there are not many more parts of military history that are more difficult to understand than World War I. So when you said we touched on a bunch of little bits of topics last time. Yeah, we're not going to cover even
all that
one 1/1000th of World War I in this podcast, but
right.
But we can talk about definitely what's coming up on Saturday, and it's here in the U.S. we refer to it as Veterans Day, and everyone knows Veterans Day is November 11th. Why?
Yeah, that was my question earlier.
Why is that? It's just not it's not an arbitrary date. It was specifically chosen, and the origin is World War I. And I'm not sure that everyone knows that. I'm sure a lot of people do. Probably most of our military service members understand that. Yeah, or might have an idea.
I didn't know that.
Yeah.
I try to follow all the things. I'm the son of a veteran, Air Force veteran, and my uncle was in the Navy, all those things, and I didn't know that.
Our last podcast said he likes to honor his dead, so
yeah, I do, but I didn't know I didn't know Veterans Day. Just the reason why it was picked for November 11th, and it was due to World War I.
Right.
So, in case folks haven't listened to the previous one and don't really know who Dean is, can we get a quick synopsis of what you do and where you're at before we dig into that?
Right. Well, yeah, I'm Dean Shissler. I am the director of Nebraska City Museum Association, which is in Nebraska City, Nebraska. We've got population of 7,000 people, and we have 9 museums, and those 9 museums are my job to keep running. So
are those museums all kind of within Nebraska City area?
There are 8 in Nebraska City and 1 in Syracuse.
And is it that's not normal, right?
No, not by far. I think our per capita number, I believe, is the most in the nation.
Yeah.
So
really?
per population.
See, I told you it was the best in the nation. Right, I told you.
That's what we used to say, the number that we used to use kind of as a joke because it doesn't mean anything. But London is known for its museums. There's a lot. There's over 400 in London. Mm-hmm. Considering the population of London, if they wanted to have the same museums per capita that we do, they would need 12,000 museums in Greater London.
Whoa.
That's not possible.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, it's a lot, but we're proud of it. It's over 100 or just under 100 people per museum.
But I think, is anyone else wondering why are there so many there? Is it just because that's where a lot of things started or ended, or?
Yeah, I mean, it's a combination of so many years of history.
Okay.
On so many different topics, and just a community has a citizenry that's very dedicated to preserving that history.
Okay.
I mean, with those 8 museums in town, there's really not any overlap as far as what they cover. So there's, everything. Civil War Museum, the Craigle Windmill Museum is a manufacturer, it's a factory. Lewis and Clark, Fire Museum. Excuse me, Wildwood Victorian Mansion, the Old Freighters Museum. It's Oregon Trail and Westward Expansion era, Arbor Lodge. They're all over the place. So can kind of cover all those topics. But going back to 1804 when Lewis and Clark came through, so you have 219 years or whatever of history, then
Okay.
it kind of comes from that. But
Very cool.
And all those towns around there, Brownville, Peru, they're really old townships for Nebraska. They're some of the oldest in the state.
yeah, absolutely. And some of our museums are up there for the oldest buildings in the state. Our old Freighters Museum is built, we think, because we were just talking about this not too long ago. We're not entirely sure. Within a year, 1858.
Wow.
Which I saw something, what was that, on the news the other day. And they were talking about a house up in Omaha. And I think it was one of the houses on the Fort Crook campus. And they said, this is one of the oldest structures in Nebraska. It was built 1879. I was like, well, I don't know.
If only you knew.
Gonna have to check
it's
you on
an
that.
entire generation between when that was built and when, some of ours were built. And so, so that makes my job interesting too, because trying to maintain and do upkeep and whatever on a 175-year-old building is a lot.
And fingers crossed, we're going to have some renovations, right, coming our way. Hopefully.
Yeah, we kind of started the ball rolling on that because this is the 175th year of that building. And actually next year would be the 175th anniversary of Russell Majors and Waddell, who was a freighting firm that ran their branch office out of that building. So we need a lot of work done on that structure. And we've got a bunch of structural improvements to do, roof, siding, paint, trim replacement. And then we're also going to do some new exhibits, some new interactives, build an archive storage room inside because the Historical Society collection of photos and documents and maps and everything is housed in that museum.
Yeah.
And then we're going to do some major landscaping renovations outside, which if we're able to pull it off, it's going to look pretty cool. So we want to make it look like we grabbed that house out of 1858 and just dropped it in 2023.
That would
So
be sweet.
Yeah.
we're talking big limestone, rough retaining walls all the way around the corner lot, and then split rail fence and native grasses and flower beds and stuff. So
we'll put all that in the links because I think people are going to want to visit and check it out. And if they can help
There's got to be
support-
pictures, right? Up of what the design would be.
We're getting there.
Okay,
Not yet.
close.
So
Okay.
we're doing 3 phases. So phase one is structural, which is the roof and paint and stuff, and making sure it continues to stand. Which right now it needs some help to keep standing. And then phase 2 is all the inside stuff, and then phase 3, once we get all the major construction done, then we can go back and plant flower beds and do landscaping and stuff.
Okay.
So it's a 3-year, 3-phase project. So hopefully starting this spring, fingers crossed. So
Yeah, there's some history down there, man, that people just don't realize, and we didn't realize. And we talked about this on the last podcast back in February. You could go down there and spend a few days and see so much cool stuff. Go stay at the lodge, go bounce around from museum to museum, whatever. That'd be...
So what we've always said is it can't be done realistically in a day.
Yeah.
Because museums are, when they're open, some of them are 4 hours a day, some are 6 or 8.
Okay.
If you consider an hour to 2 hours to do a tour of each of them, it would be impossible for 2 people to do all 8 of them even in a day. So
very cool.
Yeah.
So let's dig into Veterans Day. So you touched on it a little bit earlier. I think what we start with, and we talked about this before we started recording, that a lot of us, even us here, don't realize. Where did this come from? There was a specific date and numbers and all these kinds of things. So let's dig into that. Where do you want to start with it?
Well, just the basics, really. Veterans Day as a holiday is 1954 is when that comes about. The name was changed from Armistice Day to Veterans Day.
Armistice?
Armistice.
Armistice.
Which means...
Means a ceasefire or truce between 2 warring nations.
Okay.
Ceasefire and truce are probably better words for it.
Right.
Because there's a lot of to unpack underneath there too, because really it wasn't a peace treaty. It was the end of World War I. It was November 11th, 1918. Specifically, the 11th hour of the 11th day of the 11th month in 1918. So the fighting continued all the way up until exactly 11 a.m. And then everything just fell silent. And so you're talking like continent-wide across Europe. You've had nothing but some of the most brutal, unimaginable warfare that this world has ever seen for 4 years. And all of a sudden it just stops. That would be a very cool thing to witness and something to celebrate. And it was something to celebrate, so much so that, we're not the only country that celebrates it. I mean, every country involved has a version of Veterans Day or Armistice Day, or in the UK it's Remembrance Day, in the UK and Australia. Some even have specific holidays to honor certain units. I know Australia and New Zealand has Anzac Day, which is the Australia-New Zealand Army Corps, specifically celebrating them. I want to say that's in March, but I'm not sure. So that's what it was. And so
can we real quick, because I got confused on like some years, and I don't know if you guys did or not, but in the beginning there you said something about 1954. So in 1918, when the armistice happens, after the Treaty of Versailles is signed the following year, which is the official end of World War I, the U.S. Government created Armistice Day to celebrate that and to celebrate veterans of the war. In 1954, it was changed from Armistice Day to Veterans Day. Okay.
To also
Updated.
include, because we had World War II and Korea in that time.
So they kind of were bringing more into it. Okay.
And so now you have the, the three main holidays. So you have like Veterans Day honors all current living U.S. veterans. Memorial Day is all U.S. service members who have died in military service. And Armed Forces Day is all current active duty U.S. military members.
Oh my gosh!
Whether they've been
in
combat or not.
Right.
Is
right.
the deal. Okay. Yep.
So if you want to be really picky and pedantic about it, if you're active serving, and someone says Happy Veterans Day, you can be like, well, not to me, but yes, Happy Veterans Day.
Right.
So, but I don't think anybody cares. It's more of just a celebration.
Yeah.
No one's that picky. But yeah, that's when it was changed, was that 1954 date.
Well,
so
it's not just being picky; it's being enlightened, like knowing. Like I feel like these are things that we should know.
Yeah.
Right.
You know what I mean?
And it's if you want to get technical, that's how it's broken down. Is like certain groups are honored specifically.
Yeah.
And I think there's Women's Veterans Day and Women's Memorial Day as well.
Really?
That is specifically female military members. So, but I don't know when those were enacted. I want to say it was much later. Well, I think those holidays are still in there. So.
I think, like you said, Andy, I mean, it's important to understand the differences. Not that people need to be like super picky and like, oh, you're not using that right or whatever, because that does happen.
Yeah.
But just to have that understanding. And there's a really good chance that when we were in elementary school or whatever, that we were told this stuff.
Sure.
Like it might have been like in passing or whatever in history class. And you're bombed with so much stuff that we don't remember.
Do you think they say that today?
What do you mean?
Do you think teachers talk about this today?
Oh, I'm sure.
Yeah.
I'm sure it's covered at some point. I don't know
I hope
when,
so.
but yeah, I mean the proper response to that is if somebody says Happy Veterans Day and your armed service member is thank you.
Right.
That's
right.
that's the response.
Yeah.
Or if it's someone maybe thank you, and also did you know this?
Everyone's
just,
like defaults anymore to if there's a holiday that has something to do with the military, it doesn't matter what it is. They may or may not understand it.
Yeah.
They see military folks and they're like, "Thank you for your service."
Yes.
Service.
I've totally done that.
And folks mean that genuinely, but that's what we're talking about here. Like we're trying to help you understand. Here's what this is actually about.
Well, and when you get further away from the why, like why we're celebrating Veterans Day compared to Memorial Day, then Memorial Day to Armed Forces Day, when you don't understand the why, then can you really partake in it or understand what you're doing? Like it doesn't mean as much if you don't understand the why. And so, like, I'm already like, I love where this conversation's going because now I got a better grasp of the why.
And and the why is important too, because we have sort of a history in this country of warfare. We've been doing it for a while.
Yeah.
We have quite a few. I think, we've been a country for like 250 years almost, and we've been at war for like 230 of them.
Sure.
So, but there's only one war that had such an impact as far as holiday and celebration and commemoration of that day. Why? And it's because of how intense it was and how large scale it was. I mean, literally, World War is the best explanation. I mean, it was literally every possible country that could contribute soldiers and material and ordnance to that war did. And, I mean, the total loss of life is off the charts. I mean, you can say numbers, but it's not even...
Like what would be a ballpark number?
Well, the general estimate for military deaths is 9 million.
Oh.
Civilian
gosh.
deaths included,
Okay.
Got to be way higher.
It's somewhere between like 30 to 70 million.
Yeah.
Wow.
Okay.
And then you add on like 1919 into 1920 is the Spanish flu epidemic. And so if you take like those 3 years, it's worldwide 150 to 200 million. I mean, it's a huge amount. I pulled up.
Well, and it was a really
Yeah,
gruesome war,
yeah.
too, because you still had people on horseback riding those horses into machine guns in some parts of the world. I mean, it was nasty because you had so many different things coming together from different cultures. Like you said, it was a worldwide affair.
Well, and it was something, too, that the soldiers going into it and the nations going into it, the militaries, were wholly unprepared for exactly that. Like, you had, like, the French army wearing uniforms from the Franco-Prussian War, riding into battle on horses with sabers. And that was in, August 1914 when the war starts, the Battle of the Frontiers. It very quickly became, necessary that it's like, okay, we can't wear these uniforms anymore. There's no helmets. There's no, protection. There's no
Right.
nothing. And the Battle of the Frontiers opened a lot of eyes because you have an amount of soldiers on either side that is unheard of in the history of humanity at that point. Germany mobilized 1.4 million. France mobilized 1.3. Like the largest army to date before that was Napoleon's army, and that was 700,000.
God, it started like that, too.
And and most armies up until then are not anywhere near that big. Like the greatest armies in history, they're nowhere near that big, and they can't withstand the loss of life that happened. I mean, the Battle of the Frontiers, I want to say one of the first days of that battle, France lost 27,000 men in a day. Napoleon famously said, like, I can't be defeated. I lose 30,000 men a month as a matter of course. That's what he said. And he could, because he had a people's army, he had a conscripted army,
Right.
and it was huge. But how long can you maintain losing that many people?
Right.
Because at the beginning, the Battle of the Frontiers in 1914, they're using Napoleonic War era cannons. They're 12-pound balls, 10-pound balls, about the size of a Magic 8-ball, little toy, being fired out of cannons that weigh 2,000 pounds. 6 months later, 9 months later, somewhere in there, Germany rolls out the 420 millimeter Big Bertha siege cannon, which fires a shell that weighs more than that Napoleonic War era cannon, and fires it 1.5 kilometers, 2 kilometers, about a mile. You can't. And
Seems unfair. Like,
I mean, it's unreal, and that's not the only guns they had. I mean, 420 was the largest, but there's 10, 15 other sizes of artillery, and Germany was very good at artillery. So when you're firing guns that large, they're also firing all these other smaller cannons, and say 120, 175, 305, 260, whatever they may be. and they have a pattern they're firing them in, and it's called drumming fire, which sounds like an open roll on a snare drum. You know, that like not like a tight roll, but an open roll. And it's because they could fire them in a certain pattern where when the shells are going off, it literally sounds like a drum roll for an hour, a day, weeks, like at a time, and just keep going. And it's unreal.
Just think of the accuracy, too, compared to that shell, compared to a ball that's loosely molded that's 10 pounds. Like,
well, and those shells, too, would, not hit like that ball would just hit and blow up, or just hit and to hit if it wasn't an explosive shell. Those siege cannon shells were meant for siege purposes. So it would actually hit, have a timed fuse, go through the wall of a fort, and then explode.
Whoa. So
if you hit the magazine of a fort with a 2,000-pound shell, I mean, it's done. It's over. And even the sheer size of those guns, too. The 420 millimeter was 300,000 pounds. It was huge. They had to lay concrete, wait for it to dry, assemble the gun, and then to fire it. The guys who fired it would go about, I don't think it's 2 or 3 football fields back from it, and have ear protection and lay prone and fire it electronically. And even then, if they didn't have their mouth open, their eardrums would blow.
Whoa.
Like,
it's madness.
That's crazy.
It is, because that's not the biggest. I mean, the Paris guns, I think there were 2 or 3 total, are the biggest ones that Germany ever made. And at the time they were fired, 1918, it was right at the end of the war, there were explosions heard in Paris. And they assumed it was an ammunition factory blowing up because they do that. I mean, just in general.
Yeah.
And it took a while for people to realize that they were being shelled from the line. The Western Front was 75 miles away. The Paris gun could fire a projectile 75 miles into Paris.
So all these different weapons that you just explained, these were World War I weapons?
Yeah.
In the early 1900s.
This would be, 1914 to 18.
That's
How do they
unbelievable.
even make all these bullets? It just seems...
Well, yeah, the sheer amount of shells and bullets used is unheard of. I mean, just the spring offensive, I think in that one, was it 2 days or less than 2 days? It was 1.1 million shells. That was just Germany.
I mean...
So think of like Verdun, that was 10 months long, and it was just shelling constantly for 10 months. But yeah, I mean, it's just the sheer size of those things is unreal. And it's interesting to say, too, that Paris gun, when it was fired, that is the first man-made object to breach the stratosphere because the arc of it went up so high. And Germany is really good at artillery and really good at aiming, and they have great engineers. But it shot so far away, they missed Paris the first time.
Oh.
Because the shell was in the air so long, the Earth moved. The Earth was rotating as the shell was up, and they missed Paris. And Paris is not small. It's just unreal to think of. But considering all of that, and just how brutal some of those battles were, that's why the numbers are so high. I mean, I found the list here, and I'm not going to run through all of them because it's literally dozens and dozens of countries. But just to get an idea, this is total military deaths. Russia, 1.7 million. Germany, 2,037,000. Austria-Hungary, 1.2 million. France, 1.4 million. Italy, 700,000. United Kingdom, 900,000. Serbia, 450,000. Romania, 300,000. Bulgaria, 90,000. United States, estimated 110,000. Probably closer to 50 to 60, I think.
Oh, really?
But it's like, and then you can see, Andy.
Yeah.
There's a whole nother
insane
list
numbers
of, probably 10 other countries that are between 10 and 30,000, 10 and 70,000, something like that.
So what's mind-blowing to me, though, is you're saying all this, and then just all of a sudden, everything stops on the 11th. At the 11th, who decides?
Also, what I think you have to take into consideration with that thought in mind is how that message gets passed.
Yes, that's what I'm
Because
thinking.
like today,
how does that work? We'd be calling, hey.
What we live in today, all the way all the different messages go, the electronics, all this kind of stuff. They weren't dealing with that then.
No, you have, telegraph and message runners and, pigeons.
But who
carrier
starts
pigeons.
it? You know what I mean?
It came from the peace talks. The Paris Peace Conference had been going for quite some time before they came to an agreement.
Okay.
But they only came to an agreement basically when so many countries were against the wall. Like the Ottoman Empire was almost devastated. Germany was against the wall. Austria-Hungary was all but done. Bulgaria was all but done. Mm-hmm. Romania, it had to happen at some point, and enough loss finally happened where they just said, okay, we're going to call a truce and then finish the peace conference so this can stop.
Because at that point, everybody was willing to talk because it was like,
yeah,
we are devastated.
Like enough's enough.
Yeah, they just didn't have a choice at that point.
Yeah.
And so you can see why when that finally stopped, that, the celebrations begin of like, okay, this is over. It's not official until the signing of the Treaty of Versailles in 1919, but just that time period of like, okay, we're going to stop fighting, and essentially there's peace, and then the Treaty of Versailles, and there's actual peace, but we'll say ceasefire is more accurate. Famously Ferdinand Foch, who is the Supreme Allied Commander, French commander, famously said that I feel this isn't an armistice, or no, this isn't peace. This is a 20-year ceasefire. That's what he said.
Oh.
Because the Treaty of Versailles was brutal to some countries in as far as like forcing them to accept guilt, Germany being chief among them. Article 231 of the Treaty of Versailles is called the War Guilt Clause. And it specifically, it's only like a paragraph long, like 4 or 5 sentences, but essentially just says like, well, we all here and Germany agree that essentially it's your fault. And so that was one clause in this giant treaty.
Yeah.
But the treaty also, there were reparations that had to be paid. I think it was $5 billion in gold that Germany had to pay to allied countries, Germany and other countries, not just Germany, but they had to demobilize military. They couldn't have a military over 100,000 at any point. They can't build new ships. They had to have a static navy. It's just a lot, and it builds and builds and builds, and and then you get like the all the civil strife in Germany between each war, and one of the people who was most vocal about it was an Austrian private who served in the war, and he wrote it was a quote after the armistice, and essentially was just blaming people at home. He was blaming all the the liberal people at home, the non-warmongering whatever people in Germany, and blaming them for the fact that Germany lost. And it's not a true argument. It's just how he felt.
Right.
It's called the stab in the back theory. He said the home front stabbed Germany in the back. They weren't doing what they should do, and
was this a little short man with a little mustache?
Yeah, that would be Private Adolf Hitler.
Yeah.
So he basically the Treaty of Versailles, it lays down some things that eventually lead to a whole domino effect of this happens, the Weimar Republic and the the burning of the Reichstag and the rise of the brown shirts, and we get World War II. And it's 20 years after.
Yeah.
I get a quick sidebar on that. Like, maybe this will kind of bring it in for a couple people, or maybe this is completely stupid. Do you have you watched all of the Indiana Jones movies?
I've seen the 4 of them.
Have you seen the most recent one?
No, I was throwing out Crystal Skull. That's not.
No. After
I
that.
haven't seen Dial of Destiny.
That one, yeah. So I've watched it, like, I just watch these random movies all the time. I watched that one a few different times. And I know it didn't get awesome reviews and whatever, but for people who have watched this. So the main character in the movie, who's the bad guy, at one point he's in this motel room, and this black gentleman comes in who is serving him, and he is a veteran. He's a U.S. veteran, and they're in the U.S. And so the German guy asks him, you know, where did you do? Where'd you come from? You know, whatever. And he says, oh, I served. You know, I did this and whatever. And he says something to him like, you feel good about that? And the guy's like, well, yeah, you know, this is what we did and all this stuff. And the guy says something along the lines of like, you didn't win that war. Germany lost it. And this guy is like Hitler's like right-hand man.
Oh, I do know
in the
which
movie.
part you're talking about.
And I always kind of wondered a little bit about that and like what was happening with that comment.
That's the general.
That's accurate.
The general sentiment.
Yeah.
And it was, again, it's not true in any way, shape, or form. I don't want to, quote Hitler and be like, I agree with that. No, not at all in any way, shape, or form. He was wrong. Was the Treaty of Versailles harsh to Germany? Yeah, absolutely. Did the German people, lose the war for Germany? No, absolutely not.
Yeah.
I mean, it's
They were fighting with valor too.
yeah, and there were a lot of things that led to it. I mean, you have financial and civil collapse. You have there's food shortages because the German Navy for essentially the entire war, minus like 2 battles, was blockaded. They had a lot of huge ships, but they couldn't leave port because if they did, the English Navy was going to blow them out of the water because the English Navy is, the best in the world and has been for a very, very long time.
Yeah.
The British Army, not so much at the time. It was tiny, but the old saying is like the British Navy is the gun that fires the British Army. Like the Navy shows up, blows everything to hell, and then it's like, here's a few guys in the Army. So you go on land and do your thing, and we're going back here. But so that blockade, I mean, that means there's no food imports coming in. There's nothing. And so it was only a matter of time that was going to happen. So
I got to feel like that specific date, down to the minute you're talking about, I think a big reason why it worked because everyone was ready. They were ready to pack
How long
it up
was this war?
And call peace. Like, let's shut it down, guys.
just over 4 years.
Okay.
4 years,
yeah.
2 months.
I mean, come on. Yeah.
Do you think there's any validity to that? Like, everyone was ready to say, like, all right, let's figure this out.
I agree with you. Yeah.
Is that
I
why it
mean-
worked so fast?
I mean, yeah, because you already have like countries dropping out before that even happens. I mean, we're talking about November 11th, 1918 is the ceasefire. Russia's gone by then. It's 1917 is the Bolshevik Revolution. So the Tsar's been overthrown. Russia's going through a communist revolution.
Man.
Everything's falling apart. So yeah, everyone's just ready to to give in at that point. Because so many of them have been through so much. France in particular got hit really hard. Russia has the highest casualty rate, but France, as far as the battles they were in, you could see why in 1917-18 they came to the U.S. military and they said, "Can you supply any soldiers?" And that's what my research with the Hellfighters, the 369th New York Infantry. It was an all-black regiment from New York, from Harlem. The U.S. military gave them to the French Fourth Army. And it took months and months of asking before that actually happened. And you could see why France was just begging and
They
begging
needed
of like,
people.
we need somebody.
Yeah.
'Cause
And did
they
we? Am I wrong, or did we owe them a little bit from previous conflicts?
Not really.
No? Okay.
No, because up until World War I.
Statue of Liberty was a gift. That was a gift.
Yeah. It's like
What about the Civil War? Were they played in to what we had going on?
I mean, they did a little bit. I mean, obviously they contributed to the Revolutionary War. I mean, without
War, yep,
some,
yep.
Lafayette and connections to France, where we wouldn't have won the Revolutionary War. I
Yeah.
don't believe. I don't think that's a a limb to go out on. That just is the case. But America since the War of 1812, maybe, was isolationist. and we didn't get involved in anything like that. I think the most we got involved was the Spanish-American War in Panama and Cuba, which would be 1898, 99. So when this whole like conflagration, whatever this thing is happening in Europe, most Americans were not interested in America going to war. And it took a lot of convincing from Woodrow Wilson and many, many, many other people to say, like, this is what we need to finally do. And the thing that finally forced us in, or one of the things, was called the Zimmerman telegram. There's a really cool display on it down in Kansas City, the World War I Museum. But essentially that was a telegram sent from, I think it was the German ambassador to Mexico. It was from Germany to Mexico, essentially saying, like, hey, if you get involved and attack America from the south and keep them occupied while we do this, we'll give you America when we're done. You can take back, Texas and Arizona, New Mexico, things that were ceded in previous treaties.
After California too, and in some Southern California.
But that telegram was intercepted.
Oh,
And
okay. By
when
who?
when we found that, well, by the U.S. government, and we found that telegram and went,
gotcha.
Okay. And then you have, other things obviously have the sinking of the Lusitania really pushed things forward. German U-boats sank, I don't know how many hundreds, if not thousands of ships. And it was universal warfare. So if they could even suggest that a ship, even a passenger liner, had cargo on it that was military cargo,
Boom,
they'd blow it
done.
out of the water.
Yeah.
And there were, I think, over 1,000 that lost their lives in Lusitania, and most were Americans, and so there was a lot that pushed us into it.
Yeah.
But for many, many years, we were isolationist and we stayed out of everything.
Well, those even that feeling going into World War II, like we just didn't want to get involved, and then finally the president's like, "Look, we can't keep our head in the sand. We got to do something."
Well, and that's the thing too. I think we were talking about in school, like, what do they teach? Do they teach about
Yes.
the different holidays? It's like, from high school, I don't remember World War I. I remember World War II, and I remember covering that because it's easier to cover. World War II is easy because it's up, down, left, right, good, bad,
Yeah.
good and evil. It's very clear, black and white delineated lines. Like this, we were attacked by Japan, so we went over there. That's the end of it.
Yes.
And there's very clear, like, good guys, bad guys, whatever. The origins of World War I are a gray, hazy fog.
A little fuzzy.
It's an enigma wrapped in a mystery, wrapped in whatever. And it took a lot of things for that to finally fall apart. There were diplomatic relations between almost every country in Europe, like little deals between, okay, if you get attacked, I'll protect you. And okay, if we get attacked, we'll protect them and whatever. But they were, I've heard them referred to as handshake deals. Like they weren't solid, written out, things. They were written out and agreed to, but there was nothing backing them up. And so when one of those things starts to topple, then the others go and the others go and the others go. And so you have, after Archduke Franz Ferdinand's killed, June 28th, 1914, in Sarajevo, that's when things start to fall apart. And in 2 weeks after that, a month after that, whatever, there were 15, 20 different countries that all declared war on each other.
Wow.
And it becomes this huge, that meme of Charlie from Always Sunny where he's got the strings everywhere and he's all frazzled. It's like,
Right.
this connects to this, to this. That's what it is.
Right.
It's exactly that.
Just
And-
a crazy cascading effect.
Yeah. it's
Maybe
been-
it didn't even make sense, but that's just how things were set up, and then so the dominoes fell.
Yeah, and the quote that I'm thinking of, and for some reason I can't remember who it's attributed to, but referred to it as like, oh, those agreements, you would generate more paper today buying a house than was behind some of those agreements.
Wow.
It's
That
1,
seems
2,
not
3
even
pages. Yeah.
fathomable.
And that's what's holding the continent of Europe together is things like that. because Germany had one of the greatest diplomats that's ever lived. It was Otto von Bismarck. But toward the end of the 19th century, into 1900, he's no longer there. So the guy keeping everything together
He's gone.
is gone. And he's replaced by someone who, if they hadn't been born into it, would not deserve the job.
Yeah.
It is Kaiser Wilhelm II, who just, there's no meritocracy would not have him in that position.
He was the generation that didn't plant the tree. He wasn't the generation that enjoyed the shade under the tree. He was the generation that cut the tree down. Right?
Yeah, or by inaction let it fall over.
No,
I mean that's essentially what it was. Yeah, and it's just it's been referred to, I think, as a galloping Gertie, which was it's a reference to a bridge that, you know, if you've ever seen the video of the bridge that starts swaying and then it falls over and collapses, or dominoes starting to fall, or like trying to put the pin back in a grenade once it's been pulled. Like, it's not going to happen. And so it just, everything fell apart in about a month. And then you have 4 years of, like I said, unimaginable warfare. Like, on a scale that modern people cannot imagine what that is like to live through.
Yeah,
it doesn't.
It just doesn't.
And when you compare it to like some of the things that we talk about today with like modern wars and battles that we're dealing with, and people are just like freaking out about stuff. Yeah. You can't even wrap your head around what
the amount of
these
people you're
are
talking
going through.
about.
Well, because we don't have to do any more of what they did then with the artillery barrages and the, you know, the trench to trench warfare, which is literally, you know, you're in a trench, enemies in a trench, you know, on the other side of no man's land, which is all barbed wire and mines. You fire artillery at them, they duck down. You know, when the artillery ends, they get up out of the trench and run at you.
And you do it. It's just
and then
back
you just
and
do
forth.
that over and over, but you're not gaining any land.
Yeah.
It doesn't move. I mean, Verdun was 10 months long, that battle. They didn't move. They didn't go anywhere.
It's just back and forth until someone runs out of people.
Until someone runs out of people or someone gives in.
Yeah,
right?
essentially.
Like, that's literally what
Well,
it is.
and Verdun is its own thing because that's, you know, you did say you served. Did you serve? Okay.
No, I didn't serve. My father did. My
father,
uncle
okay.
did. You know.
I don't remember which was, but like, you've understood if you look into military history that most missions in war, they have an objective. The objective is take this fort, take this hill, capture so-and-so. Like, there is a clear objective. The use of ordnance, like, you know, rifle bullets, artillery, whatever, is to achieve that objective. Verdun, it was its own thing, and the objective was the use of ordnance. General von Falkenhayn, German general, his quote was, the objective of Verdun was to bleed the French army white. That was the entire point of it.
Wow.
So instead of the barrage of artillery that then stops, and then you get out of the trench and you run, and then there'd be another barrage later, whatever, there'd be a gap in time. What Verdun was a barrage of artillery. Everyone gets out of the trench, another barrage of artillery lands. And then another, and then another, and then another.
To kill them.
Yeah,
They just let
that
new
was the
troops
entire
in.
point of it.
Shrink their forces.
And it's something unheard of before that and since. But we don't have to use those barrages anymore because, like, modern day, you know, we have missiles we can fire from 10 miles away and put it in somebody's back pocket.
Yeah.
Like we can do that now.
And not only that, again, like we talked about earlier, the rate of communication, like everybody knows about it right after it happened.
Yeah.
You know, it's not a week later or whatever that, hey, this just went down and we lost a bunch of men or whatever the case may be.
Yeah, that's still mind-blowing to me.
But so all this stuff that we've talked about and this is great because it's, you know, the time goes on and we don't even realize how long this has been. You brought with you this book, and does that book reference what we're talking about a little bit? I want to get into that because it looks really important.
Yeah, I had a specific quote in here, and I was trying to remember it, and it's not something I can Google. Yeah, this book is called From Harlem to the Rhine, written by Major Arthur Little, who was the right-hand man to Colonel William Hayward, who's the commander of the Harlem Hellfighters, and this is essentially his war diary.
And the Harlem Hellfighters, can you give us a quick explanation on that? Yeah,
the Harlem Hellfighters was the first all-black regiment in the history of the New York National Guard. It was 1916. Governor Charles Whitman issued a command that, for the formation of a black regiment. And New York had been fighting for a black regiment for many, many years before that, and that's a whole long thing. But 1916, it's formed. He chooses I think he was assistant attorney general or assistant district attorney at the time, Colonel Hayward, because he was a National Guard colonel and a good choice. And so over the intervening 2 years, Hayward went and found other officers, formed the regiment, trained the regiment. There's a lot of time in there too. And they were the 15th New York when they left. They were deployed to Brest in France and were working unloading cargo ships until the French finally convinced General John J. Pershing, Blackjack Pershing, to give them soldiers, and he gave them the 369th, which actually at the time was sort of a slap in the face because they were the 15th New York. They weren't the 369th.
They didn't use the name.
Well, 300 designation units at the time. If you didn't have a 2-digit number, you had a 3 in front of it, it means it's a draftee unit. And every member of the 369th were volunteers and had volunteered years before.
Yeah.
They were probably the most well-trained Allied soldiers, at least from the U.S. Because the average training for a doughboy, the American soldier going over, was about 3 weeks. This unit had been training for 18 months before they went overseas.
And I thought you were alluding to that. Like, this is a group of men that wanted to serve their country, that wanted to be part of that regiment.
They volunteered and said, like, we are here. We're going to train.
Yeah.
This is what we want to do. And even then, they're sent over there to unload cargo.
Right.
Because they're black. That's not even.
Yeah.
There's five. There were 5 or 6, I think, other units. There were other black regiments, the 370th, 371st, 368th, whatever. Some of them saw combat, some of them didn't. And if it wasn't for Hayward and his connection to Pershing and his pushing of like, hey, my guys need to go fight because they're trained to fight. They're not trained to unload bags of flour.
Yeah.
They would have been unloading bags of flour for the entire war. And they didn't, obviously. They were sent to the French Fourth Army and were extremely successful in what they were doing. In fact, they were the most decorated Allied unit in the entire war. That is American, French, British, everybody. 171 individual commendations. The unit received a Croix de Guerre with Palm and Star, which is the highest French honor that can be given to a non-national. And I want to say there are 171 citations. They were all Croix de Guerre, which is the War Cross, is what that is. Hayward received one, and most of his officers did, and then most of the unit received Croix de Guerre with Palm citation. But, 191 consecutive days in the trenches. That was the most of any other unit.
So right there just smashes the why for me. This is why we have to take a moment and celebrate or remember Veterans Day. What a just a fantastic piece of American history.
Right, and they were also, they weren't trained with French materials and French rifles and whatever, but they achieved all those things with French rifles because when they went to the French, they didn't get American rifles. They got French Lebel rifles, French helmets, French canteens, French, bolo knives, which is an entrenchment tool, like a digging, like weird shovel thing. So they were hamstrung in a lot of different ways. And one of the guys who won a bunch of awards was Henry Johnson. There's a lot of people that probably know from that, if they've done any research into the Hellfighters, of Private Henry Johnson. Henry Johnson won the Congressional Medal of Honor, I'm going to say the Bronze Star, Silver Star, Croix de Guerre with Palm and Star, the Purple Heart. It's just a huge list. And he fought off an entire German platoon with a bolo knife and grenades. Like that was, and then they had captured Needham Roberts, who was another private, and he chased them down and drugged Needham Roberts back to the trenches. Like, it's a whole
when you
harrowing
say soldier,
story.
Hello.
Yeah,
People use that term now, like, oh, what a soldier.
And
that is.
Yeah, and especially considering that Henry Johnson was all of like 5'3" and like 110 pounds soaking wet. He was tiny. And it's super impressive. And the accolades for them go on forever. And they also suffered the most casualties, 1,400 casualties. It was like 51% casualty rate. It was huge. Nobody got even close to that. Was it never lost a foot of ground to the enemy, never lost a man to capture, and never retreated at any point in 191 days on the Western Front.
Jeez.
They were the first Allied unit to the Rhine. They reached the Rhine River in Germany, which was the end border that everyone was trying to reach to get into Germany and invade. And I think it was on Armistice Day they planted the flag on the Rhine River. And I can't remember the exact quote, but it was one member of the unit. Oh, Noble Sissel, who was a member of the unit, said that when the Stars and Stripes were planted on the Rhine River, they were planted by trusty black hands. And they were saying, like, hey, we made it.
Yeah.
Like, we did it. And so it's a super, super impressive story. And I don't think it's been told as well or in full
Not
yet.
at all. I never heard about these Harlem guys.
Never.
You know?
Yeah. And so there's a lot of things out there about it. I mean, there's entire books. I have 2 of them with me. I have an entire bookshelf of them at home. But even those, they cover a lot of other aspects of it. They don't cover, I don't know, I guess stuff that I'm interested in as well. A lot of them do a lot of background things. They'll spend like 10 chapters just going over the history of politics in New York City, which can be its own book by itself, but it doesn't really fit into the military history side of it. But anyway, yeah, so this book itself is a history of the 369th or the 15th New York, whatever they want to be called, the Harlem Hellfighters from formation to 1919 when they're back in New Jersey. They went back in New York. And the quote that I found is at the very end in the chapter called Armistice.
Okay. There we go.
Nice.
All right.
It was Colonel Hayward's quote, and his famous sentence that was written down by multiple soldiers in the unit, including Arthur Little, on Armistice Day. He said, "The day Christ was born was the greatest day in the history of the world. Today is the second." That was the general feeling between a lot of people. And the celebrations were huge. When they actually returned to New York, that was the largest parade to that date in the history of New York City. They were the first unit to march under the Victory Arch on Fifth Avenue. It was sort of looks like the Arc de Triomphe in Paris.
Yeah.
And there were like an estimated 4 to 5 million people at that parade, and it was just for them. Like it was a big deal.
Awesome.
So
And so there was obviously a bunch of them that didn't come back. I mean, you said they lost upwards of 50% of their.
well, and that was God. I actually should have that number of how many died. 1,400 casualties, which in military terms is killed or wounded.
Okay.
So that's not combat deaths.
Sure.
That includes wounded as well.
Yep.
I don't think they lost as many as you might think,
Okay.
But a fair amount.
Yeah,
It was
Yeah.
not none.
And I was thinking in terms of casualties, like you said there, so I didn't understand that until you explained
Yeah,
that.
that's why the numbers I was reading off for the countries earlier was specifically combat deaths, because the
Yep.
casualty numbers
Okay.
are 2 to 3 times the numbers
Interesting.
that I was listing. They're up in the 4 or 5 million,
See,
for
When
Russia.
When
so.
you think about it, like that's basically 100 years ago, right? I mean, it's not like if we look at the
it's 100, 105,
Yeah.
104.
and it's so crazy. Like that really isn't that long ago.
No.
And we don't know that. We haven't heard
Right.
that.
Yeah.
But
And
why
you wanna
are our
talk
kids not learning about this?
Well, and you want to talk about being united. Like that makes me feel more united to New York, people
Right.
from New York,
Right.
people that I don't know
Yep.
than anything. So like I feel these are very important stories, and I've always been fascinated with our history, America's history, and how we got here.
Right.
It's not always pretty. World War I was terrible.
Yeah.
I mean, it was a bloodbath, but stories like this where their name alone, Hell Fighters, not the Hell's Angels or some fun little hell thing. No, Hell Fighters.
Yeah, they were
and they really were.
They were the Hellfighters. Can't remember the word in German. that meant hellfighters. They were called the Men of Bronze by the French.
Yeah.
It had a bunch of different names. Their nickname they prefer is the Rattlers, because their insignia is a silver shield with a coiled rattlesnake on it. It's a reference to the Gadsden flag, the "Don't tread on me," whatever. Yeah. But yeah, I mean, it's such a cool story of, like, you know, you said, you know, it's unity and you know, redemption and celebration, and
give a guy a chance, an opportunity. We'll show you what we can do.
Well, and exactly, because that, even them having that parade and just for them was something that Hayward promised them when they deployed. Because when they deployed in, I think, 1917, they asked to be a part of the parade for the 42nd Rainbow Division, which was a unit that was made up of a bunch of different states, another National Guard unit in New York. And the response that he received from General John O'Ryan, who was a openly bigoted Major General of the National Guard, the response was, "Black is not a color of the rainbow."
Ooh.
And they were denied a parade. And Hayward told his men, and told Arthur Little specifically, it's quoted in the book, is like, fine, when we get back, we're going to have our own parade, and it's going to be for us, and it's going to be the best one that New York has ever seen.
If that doesn't make like them just
like,
fight harder, I'd be like, watch me, bitch.
You're goddamn right. You're goddamn, God bless America.
Yeah.
I mean, that's what I think.
That's the whole time. That's all they were fighting for, was for them, not literally like fighting in combat, but like they wanted a chance.
Yeah.
Yes.
It's like, give us a chance. It's like, you let us train.
Right.
You let us learn all this. Give us a chance to fight. And even when they got the chance to fight, they were hamstrung at every opportunity. I think the way Hayward put it one time is that when they were given to the French, is the U.S. Army he said it took the little black orphan, put it on the front doorstep of the French, and rang the doorbell. And that's basically what they did.
Jeez. Yeah.
And he made no bones about it. He's like, this is a slap in the face, but at least we're getting a chance to fight. So, yeah.
Pretty cool, man.
I love it.
Pretty cool.
I really do.
What a great way to talk about Veterans Day, man. Like all that.
So
all those
much
details.
information.
Yeah, stuff that we didn't know. And those the stuff surrounding World War I. I mean, there's so much of it. It's fascinating.
And it is breezed over. I remember in middle school, like, it was a couple of weeks on World War I, and then like 5 weeks on World War II. Because, you know, you could figure out World War II in 5 weeks. You know, that's all it takes, right?
Yeah, right. Well, like I said, we're not even going to touch on a tiny amount of what there actually is. But, you know, the important takeaway is just remembering, like, why and where it came from. And, you know, it's the end of the greatest conflict that the world has ever seen, because the numbers are still more than World War II. World War II is the one people remember because it's easier to learn about. World War I was worse, and it was worse by magnitudes worse.
And I think it kind of goes back to, like, what was documented and what wasn't, and what people had access to be able to document those kinds of things. Like, we don't know, like, everything was so much more flashy in World War II, I feel like. Yeah,
and it was also, you know, we have photos from World War I. We have video. We have, you know, news broadcasts. We have, you know, everything. And with World War I, it's radio. It's occasional photos. I mean, there's even these guys, one of the most famous units in the war. There's maybe a couple hundred photos. Maybe like 150 at the most. There's not a lot, because honestly, if you were out in the Western Front in the trenches, you probably don't want to be carrying a camera. You probably want something that can make a loud noise and fire a bullet. So it's a very cool story, and it makes us think back of, like, well, why do we celebrate on the day? And that's we remember because there were a lot of people that did not come back from that war. Their memories now, so we remember, and that's why. And it's November 18th, or November 11, 1918. So, yeah, Saturday, 11 a.m., that's, you know,
you're right.
Celebration.
And I'm going to be thinking of the Rattlers, you know. I'm going to have a moment and think about that, all of it, you know. That's what it's all about.
For sure.
Isn't there a beer that's called Rattler?
Radler. Yeah, Radler.
Okay.
Yeah.
Completely
Which is,
different.
which is a German. It's a German beer.
Oh,
you know?
well, I'm just thinking you could drink one at the same time as
I
you
know.
were thinking one.
I know where
So-
you're coming from. Nebraska Brewing Company has the Lemon Rattler, and it's like their
Okay.
daytime light.
All right,
Rattlers
sorry.
are pretty good. I'll give that to you.
Sure.
Yeah.
Have a
This
Rattler.
This is with T's.
with the T.
Yeah.
That's with the D. Okay,
Rattlers,
I got.
snake.
Okay, we'll just wind it all up with that.
All right,
Don't
well,
tread on me, drink me.
Yeah. There you go.
There we go.
I guess that's what we got. So, Dean, thanks for coming, man. It was fun. It was.
Yes.
I think it's going to be very educational for folks. Super
Thanks for
educational
coming
for
back.
Thanks for having me.
This is a great way to get into the weekend.
He's like our history guru. You
Yep.
got to think of a name for Dean. What
Yep.
do people call you in Nebraska City?
Any number of horrible names. but,
No,
I'm just kidding.
Get out of here.
the Wizard of History or what?
Yeah, usually that museum guy. Usually,
Okay,
I don't know.
yeah.
Something
I
like
I like
that.
that.
So,
Yeah.
That
yeah,
museum guy.
That one museum guy that does
That
does the
guy.
history stuff. Yeah.
All right, well, let's
Perfect.
have that museum guy back sometime.
We got to do it.
Sounds good.
Thanks.
All right, what else? You guys got anything else?
No.
All right, we're
All
going to
right.
shut down.
Peace.
Happy Veterans Day.
Yep, for sure. We'll see you.